Samuel had always believed happiness was a destination, something he could reach once he had all the right pieces in place. A stable job, a loving relationship, financial security. But life had other plans. At 28, he found himself standing in the wreckage of his carefully constructed life. His fiancée, Avery, had left, unable to endure his endless pursuit of perfection. His corporate job, which once seemed like a golden ticket, now felt like a cage, suffocating his dreams. And his bank account, once brimming with promise, was now a reminder of his reckless choices. Lost and desperate for meaning, Samuel did something he had never done before. He packed a single bag, got into his old car, and drove with no destination in mind. He wanted to escape, to outrun the emptiness gnawing at his heart. The journey was not easy. His car broke down in a small mountain town, forcing him to stay longer than intended. With no money for repairs, he took a temporary job at a local diner, washing dishes and wiping tables. At first, it felt like a humiliating setback. But in that little diner, surrounded by strangers who slowly became friends, Samuel began to see life differently. He met Ava, a free-spirited artist who lived for the present. She painted with reckless abandon, her hands stained with colors of the sunset. She taught him that joy wasn't found in control, but in surrender, letting life be messy, imperfect, and beautiful. One evening, as they sat by a quiet lake, Ava asked, "What are you running from?" Samuel hesitated. Then, for the first time, he admitted the truth. "Myself." Ava smiled. "Maybe happiness isn't something you chase. Maybe it's something you allow." The words stayed with him. Over the next few weeks, Samuel learned to slow down. He laughed more, worried less. He stopped measuring success by money and started valuing moments instead. The town, which was once just a stop on his runaway journey, began to feel like home. Months later, with his car finally repaired, Samuel had a choice: return to his old life or embrace the unknown. Standing at the crossroads, he realized something. Happiness wasn't a destination. It was a series of small, imperfect, beautiful moments. And for the first time in his life, he chose the road that made his soul feel lighter. At first, he told himself it was just for a little while longer, just enough time to figure things out. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had already found something here that he never had before: peace. Life in the small town moved at a different pace. Mornings began with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of laughter from the locals at the diner. Afternoons were filled with quiet moments, helping Mr. Thompson, the elderly bookstore owner, organize his cluttered shelves, or watching Ava lose herself in her art, smearing streaks of color across canvas with abandon. But happiness wasn't a straight road. There were still shadows of doubt that crept in at night. One evening, as Samuel sat by the lake with Ava, he admitted, "Some days, I feel like I should go back, that I don't belong here." Ava, gazing at the water, simply said, "Where do you think you belong?" Samuel hesitated. He had no answer. The next few weeks tested him in unexpected ways. A storm rolled through, flooding parts of the town. The diner was hit hard and business slowed. Samuel's savings had run dry, and for the first time, he questioned if staying was even practical. He considered calling an old colleague, asking for a way back into the corporate world. But then something happened. One night, he found himself helping Mrs. Garcia, the diner's owner, scrub the muddy floors long after closing time. She sighed and said, "You know, this place isn't just a business to me. It's home. And you don't abandon home just because times get tough." Her words struck something deep within him. Hadn't he spent his whole life running the moment things got hard? The next day, instead of calling his old job, Samuel did something different. He helped. He gathered volunteers to fix the diner, spoke to townspeople, and even convinced a travel blogger passing through to feature their little town. Slowly, business picked up again. And with it, Samuel realized something. He was no longer just passing through. One afternoon, Ava found him sitting outside the bookstore, staring at the sunset. She nudged him playfully. "Still thinking about running?" Samuel shook his head and smiled. "No, I think I finally stopped." For the first time, happiness wasn't a distant dream. It was here, in this imperfect, beautiful town, in the people who had become family, in the life he was finally choosing to live. Samuel had stopped running, but that didn't mean his past had stopped chasing him. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced in the wind, a familiar voice cut through the warmth of the diner. "I didn't think I'd find you here." Samuel turned, heart pounding. Avery. She stood in the doorway, looking just as he remembered, poised, beautiful, and carrying the weight of their shared past in her eyes. For a moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and took a seat at the counter. Samuel swallowed hard and sat across from her. "How did you find me?" he finally asked. Avery gave a small, almost sad smile. "Your mother. She was worried about you." Samuel exhaled sharply. Of course. He hadn't spoken to his family much since leaving, afraid that if he did, they'd pull him back into his old life. Avery stirred the sugar into her coffee, her gaze steady. "I needed to see you, Samuel. To understand why you just disappeared." He could hear the pain in her voice and guilt twisted inside him. He had spent so much time trying to escape his old life, but had he ever really faced the damage he left behind? "I wasn't happy," he admitted, voice quiet. "Not with you, not with the job, not with myself. I kept thinking if I just worked harder, pushed more, I'd finally feel whole. But I never did." Avery studied him carefully. "And do you now?" Samuel thought about it. The long hours at the diner, the laughter of the townspeople, Ava's paint-streaked fingers tapping against his arm as she talked about her latest project. He thought about the peace he had found in imperfection. "Yes," he said finally. "For the first time, I think I do." Avery nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "Then I'm happy for you." She hesitated before adding, "I just wish you had told me." "I know," Samuel said, regret thick in his voice. "And I'm sorry." They sat there for a while, the weight of the past settling between them. But for the first time, it didn't feel suffocating, it felt like closure. When Avery finally stood to leave, she didn't seem angry or hurt, just at peace. "Take care, Samuel," she said softly. "You too, Avery." As she walked out of the diner and back into the world he had left behind, Samuel felt something inside him loosen like a knot that had finally been untied. Later that evening, Ava found him by the lake, skipping stones across the glassy surface. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Yeah," Samuel said, exhaling deeply. "I think I am." Ava nudged him with her shoulder, grinning. "Good. Because you still owe me a painting lesson." Samuel laughed. "I think you mean you owe me a painting lesson." She shrugged. "Details." As the stars began to flicker to life above them, Samuel realized something. His past would always be a part of him, but it didn't define him. For the first time, he wasn't looking backward. He was looking forward toward a future he was finally ready to embrace. And as Ava reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his, Samuel knew. As the days passed, Samuel settled deeper into his new life. He no longer woke up with a feeling of urgency, of needing to be somewhere else. Here, in this little town, he had built something real: friendships, a purpose, and maybe even love. But the future had a way of testing those who thought they had it all figured out. One afternoon, as Samuel was helping Mrs. Garcia restock shelves in the diner, Ava burst through the door, her eyes wide with excitement. "Guess what?" she beamed. Samuel smirked. "You finally learned how to cook something other than burnt toast?" Ava rolled her eyes. "Funny. No, I got invited to showcase my paintings at an art gallery. In New York." For a moment, Samuel's heart stalled. New York. The city he had left behind. The life he had walked away from. Ava's grin faltered as she noticed his hesitation. "This is a good thing, right?" Samuel forced a smile. "Of course. That's amazing, Ava." She hesitated. "I leave in 2 weeks." 2 weeks. That was all the time they had before everything changed. One night, they sat on the rooftop of Ava's small apartment, looking out at the stars. "I don't know if I'm coming back," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel swallowed hard. He had known it was a possibility, but hearing it out loud made it real. "I don't want to hold you back," he said, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. Ava turned to him, searching his face. "But do you want me to stay?" He hesitated. If he asked her to stay, she might. But would she resent him for it? Would he be taking away her chance at something bigger, just like his old life once tried to do to him? Finally, he exhaled and shook his head. "I want you to be happy, even if that means you have to go." Ava's eyes softened. She reached for his hand, squeezing it. "You've changed, Samuel." He let out a small chuckle. "Yeah." She nodded. "The old you would have tried to control this. Would have begged me to stay." Samuel sighed, staring up at the sky. "Yeah, but I learned that love isn't about keeping someone in a place where they don't belong." Ava smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I'm going to miss you." He looked at her, really looked at her, the wild, untamed spirit who had taught him to embrace the messiness of life. "I'll miss you too," he admitted. The day Ava left, Samuel stood at the bus station, watching as she disappeared into the horizon. The town felt different without her. Quieter, lonelier. But as he walked back through the streets, greeted by familiar faces, he knew he wasn't lost this time. He had found himself here once, and he would continue to build a life worth staying for. Because happiness wasn't just in love or in chasing dreams, it was in the moments in between. And no matter what happened next, Samuel was finally ready to embrace them.